She spent 4 months saving for that dress. 4 months of double shifts, skipped lunches, and quiet pride. And in 30 seconds, Adrian Holloway reduced it to a punchline in front of 500 people. The laughter was the worst part. Not cruel, just comfortable, the way people laugh when someone with power gives them permission to. Vivian Cross stood in the middle of Chicago's most glittering ballroom, champagne she hadn't touched warming in her hand, and felt the floor tilt beneath her heels. She was about to turn and walk out with what little dignity she had left. Then the doors opened, and every single person in that room forgot she existed. Except one. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the end of this story. Hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dress was emerald. Not the dark, almost black green that showed up in expensive boutiques downtown, but a true emerald. The color of something alive. Something that hadn't learned to be subtle yet. Vivian had found it in a small shop on West Division Street, run by an older Vietnamese woman who altered it twice without charging extra, who said, when Vivian finally stood in front of the mirror with the zipper closed all the way up, "You look like someone who survived something." Vivian hadn't known whether that was a compliment. She'd decided to take it as one. The invitation to the Hargrove Foundation Gala had come through her hospital's administration office. A block donation of tickets distributed to senior clinical staff. Vivian had almost declined. She was a pediatric nurse, not a socialite. Her world was IV lines and anxious parents, and the particular fluorescent hum of a children's ward at 2 in the morning. Black tie events in marble ballrooms were not her natural habitat, and she knew it. But Dr. Fenwick, her department head, a blunt 60-year-old woman who wore orthopedic shoes to every formal occasion and didn't care who noticed, had put the invitation on Vivian's desk with a single sentence. "You've been hiding long enough." That was 3 weeks ago. Now Vivian stood at the edge of the Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom, holding a glass of champagne she'd accepted reflexively from a passing tray, watching $800 shoes glide across marble floors. The room smelled like money. Not the abstract concept of it, but the actual physical smell, a layered combination of aged spirits, imported flowers, and a half-dozen competing colognes that each cost more than her monthly car payment. She knew perhaps 4 people in the room. One of them was already avoiding eye contact with her. She was deciding whether the shrimp canapes were worth navigating the crowd near the appetizer table when she heard the voice. She had trained herself, over 14 months, not to react to that voice. She had practiced the neutral face in her bathroom mirror the way she'd once practiced clinical procedures, methodically, repeatedly, until the muscle memory overrode the instinct. She thought she'd gotten good at it. She hadn't gotten good enough. Vivian. Adrian Holloway said her name the way he said most things, with the easy certainty of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered to him. He was handsome in the particular way that photographs well and exhaust you in person. Sharp jaw, expensive haircut, a tuxedo that had been cut specifically for his body by someone in Milan. He was 41 years old and looked 35 and knew it. Beside him stood Cassandra Merritt, 28, blonde, wearing a silver gown that probably cost more than Vivian's car, and 2 men Vivian recognized as associates from Adrian's development firm, both with the practiced smiles of people who knew they were about to watch something entertaining. "I almost didn't recognize you," Adrian said. He wasn't being cruel yet. That came later, always. First came the performance of pleasantry, the stage setting, the way a man like Adrian Holloway needed an audience properly arranged before he delivered the line. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "I didn't either, until recently," Vivian said. Her voice was steady. She was grateful for that, at least. "You look—" Adrian paused, and it was the pause that did it. The half-second too long. The theatrical consideration that was itself the cruelty, wrapped in the costume of deliberation. His eyes moved down to the dress and back up. "You went with green." "I did." Cassandra said nothing. She was looking at her champagne with the focused attention of someone who had learned that looking somewhere else was safer. "Where did you find it?" Adrian asked. "A shop on Division." "Division Street." He repeated it with a small smile. Not mocking, not yet. Something worse. Something that looked almost like sympathy. "Good for you. Staying within your means. That's smart. That's very practical." The 2 associates were watching now. Around them, the nearest conversations had gone slightly quieter. The natural drift of social attention toward the possibility of drama, the way people at parties always find themselves oriented, without quite deciding to, toward the room's emotional center of gravity. Vivian took a small sip of her champagne. She didn't want it. She needed something to do with her hands. "The Foundation does good work," she said, aiming for the exit from this conversation, trying to find the door. "It does," Adrian agreed. Then, "I'm surprised they're distributing tickets to the nursing staff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Democratizing these events, getting different perspectives in the room, I think that's admirable, actually." He said it with complete sincerity, which was the most devastating part. "Though I imagine it's a different kind of evening when you're here on a donated ticket, different relationship to the room." "Adrian," Cassandra said very quietly. He ignored her. "I just mean," he lifted his own glass, "when you've actually put serious capital into the foundation, there's a different investment, a different sense of ownership. Not better, just different." He looked at the dress again. "Though I have to say, and I mean this genuinely, that dress, for what you probably paid for it, it's not bad. It's not bad at all for the price point." The nearest conversations had gone silent. Vivian could feel it, the attention of the room condensing around this small, awful moment. She could feel her face doing the things she'd worked so hard to prevent, the slight tightening around her eyes, the heat at the back of her throat that wasn't from the champagne. "Thank you," she said. Flat, closed. "I'm just saying," Adrian's voice had acquired a new quality, something almost plaintive, the effect of a man who wanted the room to believe he was being reasonable. "You didn't have to come to something like this wearing—" He gestured vaguely toward the emerald dress, and then laughed, short and light, the laugh of someone who just thought of something genuinely amusing. "I mean, Vivian, that's the dress you could afford after leaving me. It looks cheaper than the wine they're serving." Someone to their left, one of the associates, exhaled a short sound that was almost a laugh before converting it into a cough. It wasn't silent now. It was the particular sound of a room full of people processing something and making their choices about whether to participate. And too many of them were making the wrong choice, the small uncomfortable titter spreading in a soft wave through the nearest cluster of guests. A few people looking away because looking away was its own form of participation. Vivian set her champagne glass down on the nearest surface, a narrow cocktail table at her elbow. Very carefully, very precisely, the way she set down instruments during delicate procedures. Her hands did not shake. She had made sure of that. She reached for her clutch. She was going to walk out. She had decided in the space of one breath that she was going to walk out, and she was going to do it without rushing, because rushing would give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd broken something, and he didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve the satisfaction of seeing her run, so she was going to walk at a normal pace. She was going to... The sound happened all at once. It wasn't a dramatic sound. There was no announcement, no music swelling, no obvious signal. What happened was simply that, across the ballroom, the large double doors that led from the hotel's main corridor opened, and the sound of the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way a room changes when its air pressure shifts, when something enters that displaces the atmosphere. Conversation stopped. Not one or two, not a cluster near the door. All of them, in a spreading silence that moved across the ballroom like a wave moving outward from a stone dropped in still water, each ripple of quiet reaching farther than the last, until the only sound in the Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom was the string quartet in the far corner, which took another 4 seconds to realize they were the only thing making noise before the second violinist noticed and they trailed off, uncertain. Vivian, her clutch half raised, her weight already shifted toward departure, looked up. Lucien De Luca had a particular quality that photographs never managed to capture and that written descriptions always got wrong. He was not the tallest man in the room. He was not built like a movie villain. No obvious brutality in his frame, no scarring, no theatrical darkness. He was 53 years old and looked it, with silver at his temples and the kind of face that had been lived in hard, and arrived at something like stillness. He wore a black tuxedo without ornamentation, without the pocket squares and cufflinks and architectural lapels that the other men in the room used to signal their worth. He wore it the way a man wears something that was made for him and nothing more. What photographs couldn't capture was the quality of the stillness that surrounded him. It wasn't the manufactured stillness of a man performing authority. It was older than that, quieter than that. The kind of stillness that exists in a room after something irreversible has happened, when everyone understands that the moment of choice has passed. He walked into the ballroom and the crowd parted. Not conspicuously, not in the exaggerated way of movies, but every person he walked towards seemed to find a reason to step slightly to one side, the way you'd step to one side for a car moving through a narrow street, the instinctive biological recognition of something that had learned not to accommodate you. He walked past the governor of Illinois, who extended a hand and received a brief nod. He walked past the CEO of a company whose name appeared on a building visible from the window. He walked past the woman who had been named to 3 separate Forbes lists that year and who watched him pass with an expression that Vivian could not quite read. He was not looking at any of them. He was looking at her. Vivian became aware of this approximately 4 seconds before he reached her, and those 4 seconds were among the strangest of her life, because she had no framework for what was happening, no prior experience to process against, no clinical protocol for the specific situation of a man she had never spoken to. Walking with focused intention across a crowded ballroom toward her specifically. She didn't move. There was nothing in her that thought movement was the right response. He stopped in front of her. Up close, his eyes were darker than she'd expected from across the room. Not brown, not black. Something in between, with the quality of still water in poor light. They were watching her with an attention that was not aggressive, not predatory, not any of the things she would have expected. They were watching her the way you watch something that deserves to be seen accurately. He said nothing. He reached out, slowly, without hesitation, and took her right hand, the one that had been holding the clutch, the one whose fingers had gone slightly numb from gripping it too hard. He took it gently, the way you handle something that has been recently hurt. And then he bent, and he kissed the back of her hand, and the quality of the gesture was such that it was impossible to mistake for anything other than what it was. A formal, deliberate, European-style acknowledgement of regard. The kind of thing that had not been performed in this city in decades, and certainly not in front of 500 of its most powerful residents. When he straightened, he turned his gaze toward Adrian Holloway, and the look was not threatening. It was something worse than threatening. It was the look of a man who has already made his assessment and found the subject unworthy of significant consideration. He said, in a voice that was low but carried in the silence, "A woman worthy of respect never needs expensive fabric. Only small men measure value by price." Then he looked back at Vivian, and for just a moment, 1 second, maybe 2, his expression shifted into something that was not performance, not statement, not anything directed at the room. It was something smaller and quieter than all of that, and it was directed only at her. Then he released her hand, straightened fully, and turned to accept a glass of water from a nearby server, as though nothing significant had occurred. The silence held for 3 full seconds. Then it broke, not in laughter, not in murmuring, but in the specific disorganized sound of 500 people simultaneously recalibrating everything they thought they understood about the evening, about the hierarchy of the room, about what had just happened and what it meant. Vivian stood perfectly still. She was a pediatric nurse. She had held the hands of children who were afraid and parents who were falling apart. She had delivered news that broke people and then stayed in the room while they were broken, because leaving would have been easier, but staying was what they needed. She had been trained, by years of the work, not to absorb the room's emotion, not to let it conduct through her. But her hand was warm where his lips had touched it. And Adrian Holloway was standing 4 feet away from her, and the color of his face had changed in a way that she had never seen in 12 years of marriage. Not when he was furious, not when he was humiliated, not when his most important deal had fallen through, not ever. A grayish white that was not anger and not shock, but something that lived beneath both of them, something more fundamental. He looked for the first time in all the years she had known him, genuinely afraid. She picked up her champagne glass. She drank it. It was very good champagne. The rest of the evening was a kind of waking dream. People approached her who had never approached her before. Not to interrogate her about what had happened. Most of them were too practiced for that, too smoothly socialized to ask directly, but to introduce themselves, to make pleasant conversation, to ensure that their name and face were in her awareness. Now that her awareness apparently had value, it hadn't had 90 minutes earlier. She was not naive. She understood what was happening. She had watched this dynamic her entire marriage to Adrian. The way social capital in rooms like this operated. The way people oriented toward whoever held the most of it. It was simply that, for the first time in that context, the capital was adjacent to her rather than to the man beside her. She did not see Lucien de Luca again for the next 2 hours. She was aware of his location in the room, not from tracking him, but from the way the room itself tracked him, the slight directional lean of conversations, the orientation of postures, the invisible magnetic north that rooms like this developed around their most powerful occupant. He was at the far side near the windows, speaking with a cluster of men she recognized from financial news. And then he was briefly on the terrace, and then he was speaking with the foundation director near the main stage. He did not look at her again. She was not sure what she felt about that. Adrian had left within 30 minutes of the incident. She had not watched him go. She'd been in conversation with a woman who ran a nonprofit children's services organization and who had genuine things to say about pediatric care policy. But she had noticed the shift in the room's air quality that his absence created, the specific relaxation that happens when a source of low-grade tension removes itself. Cassandra had left with him. Vivian wondered, not for the first time, what that relationship looked like from the inside. She left at 10:45, earlier than she'd intended to stay, later than she'd intended to when she'd been standing at the edge of the ballroom 2.5 hours ago. The older doorman who retrieved her coat, a wool wrap she'd owned for 6 years, and that had a small mend near the left cuff she'd done herself with clothes-match thread, looked at her with the expression of someone who'd been watching the room for 30 years and had their own assessments. "Fine evening," he said, which she understood was about more than the weather. "Yes," she agreed. It was. The street outside the Meridian was cold, the mid-October wind coming off Lake Michigan, with the particular clarity that Chicago wind had, the kind that didn't build or gust but simply existed as a sustained fact of the environment, and Vivian stood on the sidewalk waiting for the rideshare she'd ordered and felt the temperature move through the emerald dress and tried to organize what had happened into something she could carry home. She couldn't. It kept sliding out of the shape she tried to put it in. The hand kiss, the words, the way he'd looked at her before he turned away, the fact that 500 people had witnessed it, the specific quality of Adrian's gray face. Her phone buzzed. She expected the rideshare notification. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "You handled yourself well tonight. LD." She stared at it. She typed back, "How do you have this number?" The response came in 14 seconds. "I make it my business to know things. Good night, Miss Cross." She didn't sleep well. By 6:30 the next morning, the photograph had already appeared on 3 different Chicago social media accounts, and by 8 it had been picked up by 2 of the city's gossip-adjacent lifestyle blogs. And by 10, it was on the front page of a tabloid site that covered the intersection of Chicago wealth and Chicago crime with the particular glee of a publication that had found its niche and committed to it fully. The photograph showed the precise moment. Lucien de Luca's silver-threaded head bent over her hand, her expression not what she would have predicted from the inside, which was stunned, but what it apparently looked like from the outside, which was something more composed than that. Something that the caption beneath one version of the image described as unimpressed grace. She stared at that phrase for a long time over her coffee. She had a 12-hour shift that started at 7, which she was already late for by the time she saw any of this, so she put her phone in her locker and walked into the ward and did her job, which was the one thing in her life currently that required complete attention and made everything else recede. The pediatric ward at St. Oran Hospital occupied the 4th floor of the North Wing and had been Vivian's professional home for 9 years. She knew every nurse on the floor, every rhythm of the shift changes, every particular quirk of the rooms and the equipment. She knew which rooms had the best light in the morning, and which had drafts near the windows, and which parents would be there when she arrived, and which wouldn't be there at all. She knew the children. Not all of them, obviously. The floor turned over, patients came and went, and the ones who stayed long enough to be known were usually the ones you were most worried about. But she knew the current long-termers the way you know the regulars at a diner. Their preferences, their fears, the specific quality of their bravery, which was always different in children than in adults, sharper and less armored. Room 412 was Marcus Webb, age 7, currently in his third week following a rare autoimmune complication that his parents had spent 6 months misdiagnosed before reaching St. Oran. His mother, Donna, had not gone home in 9 days. She slept in the chair beside his bed and received food from the nurses' station because none of them had explicitly discussed this policy, but it had simply become policy. Marcus was drawing when Vivian came in. He went through 3 drawing pads a week, and the night shift had learned to keep spares at the station. "You're late," he said without looking up. "I'm 12 minutes early," Vivian said. "You're usually earlier than early?" This was true. She put her stethoscope around her neck and moved to check his chart. Donna was awake in the chair, a paper cup of coffee in both hands, watching her son draw with the focused attention of someone who had learned to store the sight of him carefully. "How'd he do?" Vivian asked her. "Good. He ate the whole breakfast thing, even the egg part, which I didn't think was going to happen. I ate it because it was bad, and I wanted to be brave," Marcus said, still drawing. "That's a reasonable definition of bravery," Vivian said. She checked his temperature, his blood pressure, the IV site, the monitors, everything where it should be. Small mercies, the accumulated small mercies of a morning. She made notes, adjusted a setting, wrote in the chart. Standard. "You're on the internet," Marcus said. She looked at him. He was 7, but he was also the child of parents who lived on their phones, and he had absorbed an abnormal amount of ambient digital awareness for his age. "How do you know what I look like on the internet?" "Mom showed me." He finally looked up, and his expression was the specific expression of a child who is trying to seem casual about something they are very interested in. "Was that guy your boyfriend?" "No." "He kissed your hand." "People do that sometimes. It's a formal greeting." "He looked at you like you were the only person there." Vivian had no response to this, partly because it was a perceptive thing for a 7-year-old to say, and partly because she had not yet figured out what she thought about the fact that it was accurate. "Get some more drawing done," she said. "I'll be back in an hour." The first consequence arrived 4 days after the gala. She came home to her apartment, a 1-bedroom in Lincoln Square that she could afford on her salary if she was careful, and she was always careful, to find a certified letter from a law firm she didn't know. The letterhead was clean and corporate. The language inside it was less so. It was from Adrian's attorneys. The letter alleged, in 3 precise pages, that Vivian had violated the terms of their divorce agreement by engaging in public conduct that may constitute defamation or intentional infliction of emotional distress, by allowing herself to be used as a prop in a deliberate public humiliation campaign. It requested, with deadlines, a formal response and a retraction of statements she had never made. She read it twice. She called her own attorney, a divorce specialist named Patricia Howe, who had taken Vivian's case 18 months ago with the energy of someone who had seen what Adrian Holloway was and had a professional score to settle with that category of person. Patricia's response, when Vivian reached her the next morning, was a single sentence: "I'm going to enjoy this." Then the same week, her shifts were shortened, not dramatically, not in a way anyone could point to as obvious. The schedule posted for the following month showed her at 32 hours instead of her standard 40, with 2 of her preferred shifts, Wednesday double, Saturday morning, reassigned to a nurse who had been hired 6 months ago and who Vivian had trained herself. She went to her department head. Dr. Fenwick looked at the schedule with the expression of someone seeing something they had been afraid they would see. "I didn't make those changes," she said. "They came through administration." "Why?" "I'm trying to find out." What Vivian found out through a conversation with a hospital administrator who owed her a professional debt and was uncomfortable about what she was about to say. One of the hospital board members, a man named Garrett Finch, who had made a significant donation the previous spring, had made a phone call. The phone call had mentioned concerns about the public profile of nursing staff at the institution. Garrett Finch was a close friend of Adrian Holloway's. She stood in the hospital parking garage for several minutes after learning this, her car keys in her hand, the fluorescent lights humming in the low-ceilinged concrete space, and she felt a very specific kind of anger. Not hot, not explosive, but cold and architectural, the kind of anger that builds into structure instead of dissipating. He was going to try to take her work from her. Not her name, not her money. She had so little money that there was barely a target there. not her reputation in the social world she'd spent 2 years carefully extracting herself from, her work, the ward, the children. She got in her car. She drove home. She made dinner. Pasta, simple, the kind of cooking she did when she needed her hands to do something mechanical while her mind worked through something difficult. She ate at the counter because the table felt like too much space. She called Patricia Howe and left a voicemail detailing what she'd learned about Garrett Finch. Then her phone rang. The number was different from the one that had texted her after the gala, but she knew, in the way you know things that don't have obvious reasons, who it was before she answered. Ms. Cross? Lucienne DeLuca's voice on the phone was exactly as it was in person, low, without effect, the voice of a man who had learned to say things once. Mr. DeLuca, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was eating pasta. A pause. I'll be brief. I understand Adrian Holloway has begun making professional inquiries about your position at St. Oran. She set her fork down. How do you know that? I told you, I make it my business to know things. Another pause, this one slightly different in quality. I want to offer some assistance. No. The word came out before she finished deciding it, but she didn't retract it. You haven't heard what kind of assistance. It doesn't matter what kind. I don't know you. I don't know why you did what you did at the gala. I don't know what you want or what you would expect in return, and I'm not in a position to be in debt to anyone, Mr. DeLuca, regardless of what they can offer. The silence on the line lasted long enough that she thought the call might have dropped. All right, he said. That's it? You said no. That's your answer. I won't argue with it. A beat. But I want you to know that what happened at that gala, I didn't do that to create an obligation. I did it because I was standing in a room full of people who were watching something wrong happen, and not one of them did anything about it. She stared at the pasta going cold on the counter. Why were you watching me at all? She asked. Before the gala, you said you'd noticed me before. The pause this time was different. Not tactical, not the pause of a man managing a conversation, but something more like the pause of a man who hadn't expected the question to matter to him and was discovering that it did. There was a night, he said, about 4 months ago. Emergency room at St. Oran. A child, a boy, maybe 4 years old. His family was brought in by ambulance. He stopped. I had business at the hospital. Unrelated. I was waiting in the corridor, and I watched you work on that child for 40 minutes while his parents had nothing. No insurance, no ID, nothing. And the attending was making noise about liability. And you told him, in a voice that didn't give him any room to disagree, that the child's care was not contingent on his parents' paperwork. Vivian remembered. She remembered all of them eventually. He did fine, she said. The boy. I know. Another beat. That's why I was watching. She didn't say anything for a moment. Outside her window, the Lincoln Square street sounds moved through the glass. Traffic, a dog, someone laughing on the sidewalk. I appreciate what you did at the gala, she said finally. I don't want your help with Adrian, but I appreciate it. Good night, Ms. Cross. Good night. She sat with the cold pasta and the quiet apartment and the specific weight of a night that had added more than she knew how to organize. And she thought about Marcus Webb drawing in his hospital room, about the 4-year-old boy from the emergency room, about the emerald dress hanging in her closet still smelling faintly of the Meridian Hotel, about Adrian's gray face. She thought about a man she had spoken to for approximately 5 minutes total, who had, somehow, with the economy of gesture she would have said was not possible in the real world, managed to make her feel, for the first time in 2 years, like the ground beneath her feet had substance. She did not know what to do with that. She washed the dishes. She went to bed. She didn't sleep well again. The campaign began in earnest the second week of November. It did not announce itself as a campaign. That was the point. It arrived as a series of small, disconnected events that only became a pattern when you laid them out against each other. The reduced hours at the hospital, the certified letter from the law firm, a piece in a mid-tier Chicago social blog that quoted sources close to the Holloway family, describing Vivian as having cultivated a deliberate association with criminal elements following her divorce. The piece did not name Lucian DeLuca. It was too careful for that. But the implication was architectural, built into the structure of the language like load-bearing walls. Then the phone calls started, not to her, to people she knew. A nurse she'd been close to for years got a call from an anonymous number asking leading questions about Vivian's professionalism. A former colleague who had written a reference letter for her was contacted by a journalism researcher asking about Vivian's marriage. The woman who ran the nonprofit children's services organization Vivian had spoken to at the gala, Dr. Mira Alston, who had seemed genuinely interested in a possible collaboration, received an email from an address that was just credible enough not to be immediately dismissed, suggesting that association with Vivian Cross might create complications for the nonprofit's donor relationships. Vivian learned about each of these separately and understood them together. Patricia Howe was furious in the precise professional way of an attorney who has been given good material. She began building the documentation. Vivian kept working. That was the thing she understood, the thing that kept her stable. The work did not change. The ward was the ward. Marcus Webb was improving slowly, incrementally, the way improvement worked in pediatrics, not dramatically, not in the ways that made good television, but in the daily accumulation of small evidence, better color, longer wakefulness, 3 meals instead of 2. His mother had started going home on alternate nights, which was its own kind of progress. The other children were their own constellation of needs. Vivian moved through them the way she always moved through them, methodically, without rushing, without the particular kind of hurry that was actually about the nurse's comfort rather than the patient's care. At 11:30 on a Wednesday night, she was charting at the nurse's station when her phone buzzed. Not Lucy Yen. A number she recognized, Donna Webb. "He's asking for you," Donna said, and Vivian could hear in her voice that this was the specific kind of nighttime fear that parents of sick children carry constantly, the sudden waking, the wrong breath, the temperature that moves the wrong direction. "He just woke up and he's asking for you, and the night nurse is wonderful, but he's—" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Vivian said. She was there in 17. Marcus was awake and afraid in the specific way that night fear in children worked. Not the sharp fear of an acute event, but the slow gathering fear that comes in the dark when you're 7 and you've been in a hospital for a month and some part of you has started to understand things that 7-year-olds aren't supposed to understand yet. She sat on the edge of his bed. "What's happening?" he asked. Not about his health, not about the hospital. She understood he meant the bigger question, the one that had no good clinical answer. "Right now?" she said. "Yeah. Right now you're in a warm room with good monitors and I'm sitting on your bed at midnight because I drove here to sit with you." She pulled the blanket slightly higher. "That's what's happening." He looked at her for a long moment with the enormous dark eyes of a child who is measuring whether this is the truth. "Okay," he said finally. "Go back to sleep." He did. She sat there for another 20 minutes after his breathing steadied, in the specific quiet of a hospital floor at midnight, with the monitors humming and the corridor lights at their night-level dimness and Donna asleep in the chair again. And she thought, this is the thing he can't take from me. Adrian could mess with schedules and phone calls and what people whispered at parties. He could not come into this room. She drove home at 1 in the morning through empty Chicago streets, and she was almost at her apartment when she noticed the car. Dark sedan, 2 cars back. It had made the same 3 turns she'd made in the last 6 minutes. Not impossible. This was a residential neighborhood with limited routes. But something about it had the quality of deliberateness, of a vehicle that was maintaining distance rather than simply traveling in the same direction. She drove past her apartment, made another turn. The sedan made it too. She called Patricia Howe's emergency line. Patricia picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake. "I need you to listen to me carefully," Vivian said. "I think someone is following me." Patricia's voice went into a register Vivian had not heard from her before. Sharper, compressed, all the pleasantry gone. "Where are you right now?" "Lincoln Square. In my car. Drive to the precinct on Lawrence. Don't go home. I'm calling someone." "Patricia, drive to the precinct, Vivian. Now." She drove. The sedan followed her for 2 more blocks, then turned off onto a side street and disappeared. She didn't know if that was better or worse. She sat in the parking lot of the Lawrence Avenue precinct for 6 minutes before she could make herself go inside, and she was sitting there, engine running, hands on the wheel, and her phone rang. Not Patricia. Lucien. I know about the car, he said. She felt the hair at the back of her neck. What do you mean you know about the car? It's been handled. You can go home. How, Go home, Ms. Cross. You're safe. A pause. I'm sorry. I was watching the situation and I waited too long. I didn't want to overstep. That was a miscalculation on my part. She was gripping the steering wheel hard enough that her fingers ached. You have people watching me, she said. Not watching you. Watching the situation. There's a difference. Is there? A long silence. I understand if you're angry, he said. I'm not angry. And she wasn't, she realized, which was itself strange. What she was something more complex than anger, something that included fury at Adrian, and the unsettling awareness that the man on the phone had somehow anticipated a threat she hadn't known was material. And underneath both of those things, something else, something she was not ready to name or examine. Go home, he said again, gently. Lock your door. I'll call you tomorrow. She went home. She locked the door. She stood in her kitchen in her coat, car keys still in her hand, and she thought about the emerald dress in the closet, and the boy with the enormous dark eyes, and the cold sedan 2 cars back, and the voice on the phone that had said I waited too long with something in it that was not calculation. She thought about what was coming. She thought about what it meant that she was not afraid. And in the morning, she learned that 3 of Adrian's legal maneuvers had been quietly neutralized overnight. Frozen assets suddenly unfrozen. A key piece of fabricated documentation mysteriously delivered to Patricia Howe's office by an anonymous courier, a board member at her hospital who had made a phone call on Adrian's behalf, receiving, in turn, a phone call of his own that Vivian did not know the content of, but that resulted, by end of business, in her schedule being quietly restored to its original 40 hours. She did not call Lucien to thank him. She was not ready for that conversation. But she stood in the ward at the start of her shift, stethoscope cold against the back of her neck the way it always was in November. And she looked down the corridor at the numbered doors and the night shift handover chart and the small mechanical world of the place where she did her best work. And she thought, he is not going to stop. Adrian was not going to stop. Whatever had moved in him that night at the Meridian Hotel, whatever gray basement-level fear Lucien's gesture had cracked open, it had not softened. It had hardened into something else, something Vivian could feel at the edges of her days, the way you feel a storm system before the weather breaks. The particular quality of pressure in the air, the electrical charge of an atmosphere about to change. She was right. She just didn't know yet how wrong she was about what form it would take. The call came at 6:14 in the morning, 4 days after the sedan had followed her home. Vivian was already awake. She'd been awake since 4:30. The kind of sleeplessness that doesn't feel like insomnia, but like your body has simply decided that sleep is no longer the most important thing happening and has quietly withdrawn its cooperation. She was on her second coffee, standing at the kitchen window watching the Lincoln Square street come gray and slow into November morning, when her phone rang. Patricia Howe. Also already awake. Also from the quality of her voice, not happy. I need you to sit down. I'm standing. Sit down anyway. Vivian sat on the kitchen counter, which was not what Patricia meant, but was the closest surface. What happened? Adrian's legal team filed a motion yesterday afternoon. After business hours, they timed it specifically so we wouldn't see it until this morning. Patricia's voice had the flat, controlled quality of a woman who is managing something hot by compressing it into a very small space. They're alleging psychological instability. They want to reopen the asset division on the grounds that your, and I'm quoting, erratic behavior and inappropriate associations since the divorce settlement suggest impaired judgment at the time of signing. The kitchen was very quiet. Inappropriate associations, Vivian said. Lucien DeLuca, obviously. I've spoken to him twice. I know that and you know that. What the motion alleges is different from what actually occurred. They have photographs from the gala, they have the texts, which means someone accessed your phone records, which is its own issue I'm already pursuing. And they have a statement from someone at your hospital describing what they characterize as erratic scheduling conflicts and emotional volatility in the workplace. Who? I don't have the name yet. I will. Vivian set her coffee down. Her hand was steady. She noticed that it was steady and found it mildly surprising. What does this mean for the divorce hearing? It means Adrian is trying to delay it. If he can get a judge to entertain the motion, we push back to February at the earliest, maybe March. And in the meantime, he'll file for temporary injunctions on the remaining shared assets. There's a small account from your mother's estate that we haven't finalized, and a piece of property in Indiana that he knows about the Indiana property. He's known since the beginning. He left it alone because it wasn't worth the fight. Now he's picking up everything that's lying around because he doesn't care about the property. He cares about making this last as long and as painful as possible. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Patricia. Yes. How bad is this, actually? Not the version where you manage my expectations. The real version. A pause. Patricia Howe had been practicing family law for 22 years, and she had the particular honesty of someone who had learned that lying to clients about difficulty was its own form of harm. It's not catastrophic. The motion is thin. There's nothing substantive in it, and a competent judge will see that. But thin motions still require responses. And responses take time and money and energy, and I think that's the point. He's not trying to win this. He's trying to exhaust you. Vivienne thought about that. Okay, she said. Okay? I have a 12-hour shift starting at 7. I'll call you when I get out. She hung up and finished her coffee and put on her coat and went to work, because there was nothing else to do, because the ward did not pause for Adrian Holloway's legal maneuvers, because Marcus Webb was going to be there when she arrived, and he was going to need his morning checks, and he didn't care about any of this, and that was, in its own way, the most stabilizing thing in her life. The hospital had a different quality that week. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing you could point to and name. It was in the interactions, the slightly too long pauses before people responded to her in the break room, the administrator who found reasons to be walking past the nurse's station more than usual. The new nurse, the one who had taken her Wednesday shifts, had the particular quality of careful politeness that people adopted when they knew something you didn't and were uncomfortable about it. Dr. Fenwick found her during the afternoon and walked with her to the end of the corridor, away from the station, with the deliberate purposefulness of someone who had chosen their location carefully. I need to tell you something, Fenwick said, and I need to tell you before you hear it somewhere else because somewhere else will be worse. Tell me. There's been a complaint filed with the nursing board, filed by an anonymous party. It alleges, it's general, it's non-specific. It talks about professional conduct and inappropriate relationships, and it's the kind of complaint that gets opened and investigated and ultimately goes nowhere. But the investigation takes time, and in the meantime it creates a record. Vivian looked at the end of the corridor. There was a window there with a view of the parking structure. She looked at it with great concentration. Anonymous, she said. The board doesn't disclose the source during the investigation period. When was it filed? 3 days ago. 3 days ago was the day after she'd called Patricia Howe from the precinct parking lot. She turned back to Fenwick. What do I need to do? Right now, nothing. The board will notify you formally within the week, and then Patricia Howe needs to respond on your behalf, and we go through the process. Fenwick's voice had shifted into something older and more direct. I want you to hear this from me clearly. I have been watching you work for 9 years. I know what kind of nurse you are. This complaint goes nowhere. But it's going to be uncomfortable while it's open, and I wanted you to know I'm aware of it. Thank you, Vivian said. She meant it. She also understood that Fenwick's support, while genuine, did not change the machinery that had been set in motion, did not reverse the complaint or accelerate the timeline or take the record away. She went back to work. She called Lucien at 8:15 that night, sitting in her car in the hospital parking garage because she hadn't yet been able to make herself drive home. The fluorescent lights hummed. A car alarm went off somewhere on a lower level and then stopped. He answered on the second ring. I know about the nursing board complaint, he said before she could speak. I figured you might. I also know about the motion Patricia Howe received this morning. Is there anything you don't know? Several things. A pause. I know you didn't call to ask me to fix it. No. So why did you call? She looked at the gray concrete wall in front of her car. She had a good answer ready. Something practical. Something about information sharing. Something that would let her leave this conversation having taken only what she needed and given nothing back. She had prepared that answer somewhere around the sixth floor of the hospital when she'd been charting and found herself drafting the call in her head. She didn't use it. "I don't know," she said. I've been managing this, all of it, and I'm good at managing things. I've always been good at it. It's practically a character flaw at this point. But tonight I'm sitting in a parking garage and I can't make myself drive home, and I don't know why I called you. I don't know what that means." The silence on the line had the quality she was beginning to recognize. Not empty, not the silence of someone deciding what to say, but the silence of someone who was actually listening. "It means you're tired," he said. "I'm always tired. That's not it." "Then what is it?" She breathed out. "I'm not afraid of him. I want to be clear about that. I'm not afraid of Adrian. I'm not going to fold. That's not what this is." She stopped. "What I am is angry, and I don't know what to do with it because I can't go after him directly, and I won't ask you to go after him for me, so the anger just, it sits there. It builds up. And at the end of a 12-hour shift, I'm sitting in a parking garage because going home feels like retreating, and I can't retreat, and I can't advance, and Vivienne." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She noticed it with the part of her mind that was always noticing things, cataloging them, filing them for later. "I hear you," he said. And the simplicity of it was not what she expected, not from a man with his particular reputation, not from someone who navigated the world with the systematic precision she'd attributed to him. It landed without decoration. "I hear you. You're not going to fold. I know that." A beat. "Go home. Eat something. Sleep if you can." "That's your advice." "I have more complicated advice available, but you said you didn't call for that." She almost laughed. She didn't, but she was close to it, and close was more than she'd expected. "Good night," she said. "Good night." The call she wasn't expecting came on a Tuesday. Came from a number in the hospital's administrative exchange, and when she answered it, she recognized the voice as belonging to a man named Colum Strand, mid-level hospital administrator, the kind of position that had lateral influence without vertical authority, the kind of person whose cooperation you needed and whose opposition you couldn't easily route around. "I need to speak to you," Strand said. "Not in the building." She met him at a coffee shop on North Clark the following morning, before her shift. He arrived looking like a man who had not slept well and had made a decision he wasn't comfortable with and had committed to it anyway. He ordered nothing. He sat down across from her and put both hands flat on the table, a gesture that read like someone beginning a confession. "I was the one who called the board," he said. She looked at him. "I want you to know I didn't want to do it. I want you to know that I understand that doesn't matter. What I did is what I did. But I want you to know." He was looking at his hands on the table. "Garrett Finch called me 3 weeks ago. He said, he implied that if I wasn't helpful in this situation, there were conversations he could have with certain people about my own professional conduct. There was an incident 4 years ago, a billing thing. Nothing that rose to misconduct, but the kind of thing that..." He stopped. "I have a daughter starting college next year. I have a specific mortgage, and I understand," Vivienne said. Her voice was level. She was not going to comfort him. He did not deserve comfort, and she did not have the reserves for it. "What exactly did you file?" "Vague professional conduct concerns. No specifics. The kind of thing that gets opened and sits and eventually closes. I know that doesn't help you while it's open." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." "I'll retract it," he said. "I'll file the retraction today. I wanted to tell you in person first because..." "Retract it," she said. "I don't need the in-person part. File the retraction, send documentation to my attorney, and tell Garrett Finch that you've done it." She picked up her coffee. "And if he threatens you again, call my attorney directly. Her name is Patricia Howe." He looked up at her. He had expected, she could see it in his face, something more, something punitive, the emotion that the situation seemed to demand. She wasn't going to give it to him, not because she'd forgiven him, but because she was running low on energy for other people's mistakes, and she needed what she had left for her own. She left him at the table and went to work. She told Lucien about Strand that evening because she found herself telling him things with an increasing frequency that she was monitoring without yet acting on. They had been talking, not every day but most days, calls that started with practical information and moved into other territory before she noticed the movement had happened. He was direct in a way she had not expected from a man whose world required so much indirection. He did not reassure her unnecessarily. He did not pretend the situation was simpler than it was. "Finch will try something else," he said when she finished. "I know. He won't stop at Strand. He'll find another pressure point." "I know that too." "Are you telling me because you want me to handle Finch?" "No." "Then, I'm telling you because I tell you things now," she said. And it came out with more plainness than she'd intended, more exposure than she'd budgeted for, and she couldn't take it back, and she didn't try to. The pause on the line had a different quality than the ones she'd cataloged before. "All right," he said quietly. That's enough," he said. "For now. That's enough." She sat with that for a moment, the particular weight of it, the way two words could carry more than their technical content. "He's going to escalate," she said, returning to Adrian because it was safer ground, because she could navigate that terrain without her footing going uncertain. "The motion, the complaint, the sedan, these are pressure tactics. They're not working the way he wanted. He'll move to something worse." "Yes," Lucian said. "What does worse look like?" A pause. "I have some intelligence about what he's considering. I don't want to tell you the specifics because I don't want to frighten you before it's necessary, and because I'm not yet certain of the timeline." "That's not good enough." "I know." Lucien. It was the first time she'd used his first name. She heard the slight shift in his breathing on the line. "He's made contact with people I'd classify as mercenary contractors," he said. "Not—" He stopped, and she heard him choosing words with care. "Not lethal. Nothing like that. But the kind of people who can make situations happen, create events that look accidental or spontaneous." The kitchen was very cold suddenly, or seemed cold, or the cold had always been there and she'd only just noticed it. "He's going to fabricate something," she said. "That's the current indication. Something related to the divorce hearing, something that makes you look—" He stopped again. "Unstable, unable to represent yourself. Something that gives his legal team grounds to request a psychological evaluation and delays everything another 6 months." She thought about that. She thought about what it would mean. The hearing delayed again, the assets frozen again, the month-to-month strain of not having resolution, the open nursing board complaint, Adrian's attorneys grinding through every document from their 12 years of marriage looking for anything that could be shaped into something ugly. "When?" she said. "Within the next 2 weeks is what the intelligence suggests, before the hearing date. And you're going to—" "I'm going to let it happen," he said. She stopped. "What?" "I'm going to let them move, and when they do, I'm going to be ready for them, not to stop it in the moment, to document it. Everything, every instruction, every payment, every contact point traced back to Adrian's authorization." His voice had changed, not cold exactly, but with a quality of precision that she hadn't heard from him in their more recent conversations, the quality of a man for whom this kind of calculation was native. "If I stop it early, he does it differently the next time in a way I can't anticipate. If I let it run and close the trap at the right moment, I have everything." "And what about me? While it's running, you'll be covered, every moment." "That's not what I asked." A long pause. "You're asking if I'm willing to use you as bait," he said. "Yes." "No." The word was flat and immediate. "You won't be in danger. I won't allow you to be in danger. The trap closes before you're touched, but I need you to know this is happening. I won't run this without your knowledge." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, November had turned fully cold, the specific Chicago cold of a city that had stopped pretending it might still be autumn, and the street sounds had the hollow quality of bare trees and no insulation. "If it goes wrong," she started. "It won't." "If it goes wrong, then I will—" He stopped, and for the first time in all their conversations, she heard something in his voice that did not sound managed, did not sound constructed, that was simply the sound of a man arriving at a feeling he had not fully authorized. "Then I will not forgive myself, but it won't go wrong," she breathed. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "Set the trap." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'll keep you informed every step." "You better." She hung up and stood in her kitchen and looked at the window and the dark street beyond it and the specific geometry of what she had just agreed to, not as a victim, not as someone being managed, but as a participant, as a person who had looked at the available options and made a choice with her eyes open. She had made harder choices than this. She had made them in hospital rooms with worse outcomes and less preparation. She could make this one. She went to bed. And 4 days later, the men came for her. They came on a Thursday. Not in the way she had imagined it, not in the dark, not with weapons visible, not with the crude directness of a threat you could respond to. They came in the middle of the afternoon, in daylight, in the parking structure beneath St. Aaron Hospital, and they came wearing the right clothes and carrying the right paperwork, and they came in a way that looked from the outside like absolutely nothing. Vivian had worked a full shift. She had checked Marcus Webb's afternoon blood work, numbers moving in the right direction, slow and real. And she had done her end-of-shift charting, and she had said goodnight to the day nurses, and she had walked down 4 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator because she always took the stairs. It was the only exercise she reliably got, and she had pushed through the stairwell door into the gray concrete smell of the parking structure at 6:47 in the evening, carrying her bag and her coat and the specific weight of 12 hours of other people's pain. 2 men, one near her car, a gray Civic she'd owned for 4 years, dented rear bumper, parking sticker from St. Aaron on the windshield, and one coming from her left from the direction of the elevator bank. And the angle of it was the first thing that was wrong, the geometry of their positions relative to her position, the way they were already arranged when she came through the door, as though the arrangement had been calculated in advance. The one near her car had a folder. "Ms. Cross," he said. He was 40, unremarkable, the face of someone designed not to be remembered. "I'm with Meridian Psychological Services. We have a court-authorized wellness evaluation order." He held out the folder. "You'll want to look this over." She stopped walking. She looked at the folder. She looked at the man. She looked at the second man, now 6 feet to her left, who had the patient stillness of someone who had done this before and knew how it went. "A wellness evaluation," she said, "requested by the court in connection with pending divorce proceedings. Completely standard." The man's voice had the particular quality of someone reading from a script they'd memorized well enough to make it sound spontaneous. "The evaluation is voluntary at this stage, but non-compliance would be noted in the court record." She did not reach for the folder. Her phone was in her coat pocket. She had Lucien's number on a single tap. They had agreed. He had told her, specifically, in the measured voice he used when he needed her to retain something exactly. "When they move, you do not run, you do not comply, you give me 30 seconds. She had repeated it back to him. She had understood it. "I'd like to review the documentation," she said. "Can you give me a moment?" "Of course." She put her hand in her coat pocket. Her phone was not there. She put her hand in her other coat pocket. Her bag. She checked her bag. She went through it with the deliberate, unhurried motion of someone who was not panicking, who was absolutely not panicking, who had simply misplaced a phone, while the 2 men waited with the patience of people who had already decided how this ended. Her phone was not in her bag. She had had it at the nurse's station. She was certain she had put it into her coat pocket when she left the station because she always did. It was as automatic as locking a door. She could not have not done it. The man near her car had stepped slightly closer while she was searching. Not aggressively, just 1 step. The natural drift of a person shortening a distance. The kind of movement that was easy to miss and harder to recover from. "Ms. Cross," he said, "if you're ready." She looked at him. She looked at the folder. She made the calculation that you make when you have no good options and need to choose the least bad one. She could run, which would be documented as erratic behavior and used against her. She could comply, which was what they wanted, and would result in exactly what Lucien had described. Fabricated evidence of instability, a psychological evaluation conducted by people who had been paid to find what they'd been paid to find. Or she could stall, buy time, create a delay long enough for whatever coverage Lucien had promised to materialize. "I'd like to call my attorney before I sign anything," she said. "You're not being asked to sign anything at this stage." "Then I'd like to call my attorney before I go anywhere." The second man, the one to her left, said, "The order doesn't require attorney presence for the initial evaluation." His voice was different from the first man's, harder, less performed, the voice of someone who was less invested in the theater of it. "I'm aware of what orders require," Vivian said. "I'm telling you what I require." A pause. Something passed between the two men. Not a look, not a signal she could have identified in court, but a quality of communication that moved through the air between them like current. 5 minutes, the first man said. She walked toward the stairwell door. She did not run. She pushed through the door and took the stairs 2 at a time, and on the second landing she ran directly into a woman she had never seen before. Late 30s, dark coat, the specific quality of attention in her face that was not casual, not accidental, who put a hand on her arm and said very quietly, "I'm with DeLuca. Your phone was taken from your coat this morning. We have it. Lucien knows you're here. Do not go back down those stairs." Vivian stared at her. "Who took my phone?" The woman, no introduction, no name offered, said, "Someone on your floor. We don't have confirmation on identity yet." She was already moving, already steering Vivian up rather than down, toward the upper parking levels rather than the street. "There's a car on level 4. Lucien is 10 minutes out." "Someone on my floor," Vivian said. "Keep moving." She kept moving. She climbed. Her legs worked automatically, the mechanical competence of a body that had learned to operate through shock, and her mind did the thing it did in the worst moments of her clinical work. It compartmentalized. It separated the immediate task from the information that would break her concentration. It said later to every feeling that tried to surface and now to the next step. Level 4. A black SUV. The driver, a man she'd never seen, had the door open before she reached it. She got in. Lucien arrived in 11 minutes. He got into the back seat beside her, and he looked at her face with the direct assessing quality she had learned was how he looked at things he was worried about. And she looked back at him. And the first time they had been in the same physical space since the gala was in the back of an SUV in a hospital parking structure, while 2 men with a fake court order waited 1 level below. "The order was fabricated," he said. It wasn't a question. "I assumed. It was good work. The documentation was very close." He was looking at her with the assessing quality still active. "Are you all right?" "Someone on my floor took my phone." A slight tightening around his eyes. "Yes." "Who?" "We think it's the new nurse, the one who took your Wednesday shifts." He said it with a flatness that was not casual. It was the flatness of someone absorbing something that made them angry and choosing to hold the anger in a productive shape. "We're not certain yet. I wanted to tell you in person." Vivian looked at the back of the driver's headrest. The new nurse. The one she had trained. The one who had looked at her with the careful politeness of someone sitting on a secret. The one who had taken her shifts when Adrian's friend on the hospital board had made his phone call. "How long?" she said. "We think she was placed 3 weeks ago. Introduced through a staffing agency Adrian has a financial connection to. It was subtle. We didn't catch it until she made contact with Finch's people yesterday. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of double shifts and careful management and the slow accumulation of the work she'd done to stabilize her situation, and there had been a person inside her ward, inside the place she had said could not be touched, looking for pressure points. She did not say anything. She could feel Lucien watching her, and she did not look at him because she was not ready to let him see what was on her face right now, which was not the cold architectural anger of 2 weeks ago, but something rawer than that. Something that had less structure. Something that felt closer to the specific grief of a betrayal that happens in a place you thought was protected. "The trap," she said. "Still viable. The mercenary contractors are still in play. He paused. This was a secondary operation, something Adrian added. He was covering multiple angles. He didn't trust his own plan to work. Men like Adrian never do. They multiply contingencies. It's one of the things that makes them dangerous and one of the things that makes them catchable. They create too many moving parts." "She had access to my patient's files," Vivian said. "I know. She had access to Marcus Webb's files, to all of them." "Yes." His voice was careful in the way of someone who understood that the specific nature of this violation was different from the others, that it occupied a different register. She looked at him then. She couldn't not. His face was close in the back of the car, closer than it had ever been. She could see the specific quality of the lines around his eyes, the way his expression held things with effort, the particular set of his jaw that she had come to recognize as the way he looked when he was carrying something heavy and not distributing the weight. "I want her out of my ward," Vivian said. "She will be. Tonight. I want her out tonight." "I understand." A pause. I'll handle it. Not through, she started. Legally, he said. Documentation to the hospital administration and the nursing board. She'll be suspended pending investigation by morning. He watched her face. I'm not going to do anything to her that can't be shown in a courtroom. She breathed. Okay, she said. I need you to go somewhere safe tonight. Not your apartment. We don't know how much she observed about your routine, and until the main operation closes, I want you somewhere Adrian's people can't predict. I'm not going to disappear. Not disappear. One night. A hotel. I have a room at the Langham that's maintained under a business name, completely clean, no connection to you or to me that can be surfaced quickly. One night. She looked at him. She was tired. Not the tiredness of the shift. That was physical, manageable. This was the tiredness of sustained combat, the fatigue of fighting a war of attrition against someone who had more resources and fewer scruples, and the specific exhaustion of discovering that the front line had been closer than she knew. One night, she said. Now, the Langham room was quiet and high, and the city spread out below it in the specific beauty of Chicago at night, the lake invisible but present in the darkness at the edge of the light. Vivian stood at the window for a long time. Lucien had not stayed. He had walked her to the room, checked it with the professional thoroughness of someone who had learned to check rooms, and then had stood at the door with his hand on the frame and looked at her with something in his face that he did not name and she did not ask him to. I'll call you when it closes, he said. How long? 3 days? Maybe 4. The contractors are ready to move. Our intelligence has their timeline as this weekend. He paused. You'll be back in your apartment by Monday. And Marcus Webb. We'll still be there Tuesday morning. She had nodded. He had left. She stood at the window. She thought about 12 years of marriage to a man who was now directing mercenary contractors and planting operatives in her hospital ward because she had stood in the right place at the right moment and a powerful man had kissed her hand. She tried to connect the Adrian she had married. Controlling, yes. Self-centered, yes, but not this. Not a man who moved pieces across a board with this kind of systematic malice. To the Adrian who had constructed this, and she couldn't. Or rather, she could, if she was honest. If she went back and looked at the 12 years with the specific clarity that distance and damage provided, if she stopped editing the marriage into a story that made her choices make sense. She could see it, the way the control had always had an edge of something more than insecurity. The way his anger had always had a quality of pleasure in it, a specific satisfaction in the exercise of power that she had reframed every time as passion or conviction or the intensity that she'd told herself she loved. She had not loved it. She had accommodated it. That was the thing she had never fully let herself look at, and she looked at it now, in the window of a hotel room with the city spread out beneath her, and she let it be what it was. Her phone, returned by Lucien's associate, found in the new nurse's locker with the tracking app Adrian's tech person had installed still running, buzzed. Patricia Howe. I've been trying to reach you for an hour, Patricia said. I know. I lost my phone. It's complicated. What happened? The nursing board complaint was withdrawn this afternoon. The retraction is in. And a pause, the pause of someone deciding how to deliver something. I had a conversation 30 minutes ago with a contact at the federal prosecutor's office. Vivian turned from the window. They're already watching Adrian, Patricia said. Not because of you. Something older. A financial investigation. Fraud related to a municipal contract. 18 months in. They've been building a case and they didn't have what they needed and... She stopped. Vivian, if what Lucien DeLuca has been collecting, the documentation from the mercenary contractors, the communications about the fake evaluation order, the nursing board complaint, if that material is what I think it is, it doesn't just end your divorce case. It hands federal investigators the conspiracy charge they've been missing. The room was very quiet. Adrian is going to figure that out, Vivian said. Yes. When he does, he'll either run or he'll go harder, Patricia said. And men like Adrian don't run. Vivian sat down on the edge of the bed. She thought about Lucien saying 3 days, maybe 4. She thought about his voice when he'd said, I will not forgive myself. The unmanaged quality of it, the thing that had gotten through before he could stop it. She thought about what it meant that a man who had spent 30 years building walls of precisely calibrated distance had let one of them crack in the dark, on the phone, talking to a woman in a parking garage, without apparently intending to. "Patricia," she said. "Yes." "Tell the federal contact that the documentation exists. Tell them DeLuca will cooperate with appropriate legal process." She paused. "And tell them they need to move faster than they've been moving. Because Adrian's going to find out he's about to lose everything," she said. "And I need to know what he does when cornered men stop being strategic." She hung up. She lay back on the hotel bed with her coat still on and looked at the ceiling and the city light coming through the curtains, and she thought, she had come to this hotel to be kept safe for one night. She had come because she was tired, and because the front line had moved, and because she needed to be somewhere unpredictable. She had not come here expecting to become the hinge on which a federal investigation turned. She had not come here expecting to be the thing that, when Adrian learned of it, would make him abandon calculation entirely and move from a man running a cold campaign to a man running on pure cornered animal panic. But that was what she was. That was what she had become, without deciding to, by simply being herself in the rooms where she found herself. The emergency room, the ballroom, the parking garage. This hotel room, 22 floors above a city that was full of people who had no idea what was being constructed around them. She was the piece he couldn't control. And that made her, she understood with a cold, clear certainty that was not fear and not bravery, but simply accuracy. The most dangerous thing in his world. Her phone buzzed. "Lucian." She answered. "There's a problem," he said, and his voice had a quality she had not heard before, something beneath the control, something that told her the problem was not small. The federal contact Patricia spoke to. He was compromised. He made a call 20 minutes ago to a number connected to Adrian's legal team. The ceiling was very still above her. "They know," she said. "They know we're working with federal investigators. They don't know the full scope yet, but..." He stopped. "Adrian made 3 calls in the last hour. The contractors have been given new instructions." "What instructions?" A pause. "They're not trying to fabricate evidence anymore," Lucian said. The room contracted. "Lucien, I know." His voice was stripped down to something essential, something that had no performance left in it. "I'm already moving, but I need you to listen to me very carefully because what I'm about to ask you to do is not what we agreed to, and I cannot make this decision for you. Tell me," she said. "I need you to be visible," he said. "Not hidden, not safe in this room. I need Adrian to see that you are not afraid of him, that you are not running, because if he believes you're running, he will send those contractors after you in a way that I cannot contain cleanly." A beat. "If he believes you are standing still and unafraid, he will come himself. He cannot resist it. It's his nature. He needs to be the one who delivers the ending." "You want to use me as bait," she said. "I told you I wouldn't. You told me 3 days ago you wouldn't. The situation has changed." Silence. "Yes," he said. "The situation has changed, and I am asking you, not directing you, not arranging it without your knowledge, asking you, because it is your life and your choice, and I will not—" "Where?" she said. A longer silence than any she had heard from him. "There's an event tomorrow night," he said. "A private fundraiser. Adrian will be there. He was invited weeks ago, before any of this, and he hasn't withdrawn because withdrawing would signal weakness, and he can't do that, not yet, not before he understands how much we have." His voice was absolutely level now, the levelness of someone standing on ground they don't fully trust and refusing to show it. "If you walk into that room, in front of his allies, in front of the people who watched him humiliate you at the Meridian, he'll come to me. Yes, and your people will be ready. Every single one." She sat up. She put her feet on the floor. She looked at the window and the city beyond it, and the darkness at the edge where the lake was. The darkness that had always been there even when you couldn't see it. The vast, cold thing lying just beyond the lit edge of everything. "I need to know one thing," she said. "Ask me." "If this goes wrong," she started. "It won't." "I said if." Her voice was sharp. "If it goes wrong, if Adrian gets to me before your people close in, what happens?" The pause was the longest she had ever heard from him, longer than anything in any of their conversations, longer than she thought he was capable of, And when he spoke, his voice had the quality of something said from a place that had no armor left over it, no management, no strategy. "I would not survive it," he said. "Is that an answer?" She breathed. It was an answer. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard from a person who had spent decades making honesty a liability, and it sat in the phone's silence between them with the specific weight of something that could not be unsaid and was not trying to be. "Tell me what to wear," she said. A sound from him that was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath. Something between the two. The involuntary sound of tension releasing through a very small aperture. "The emerald dress," he said. She looked at the closet where she had hung it when she arrived, green against the white interior, the color of something alive, the color of something that had survived. "Yes," she said. And the next evening, she walked back into the fire. She wore the emerald dress. She stood in the hotel bathroom at 6:15 the following evening and looked at herself in the mirror and did what she always did before difficult things. She took inventory, not of her appearance, of her condition, the way she checked patients before procedures, what was stable, what was compromised, what needed monitoring. Stable. Her hands. She held them out and they did not shake. They had not shaken in the parking garage, and they had not shaken when Lucien told her the contractors had new instructions, and they were not shaking now. She had always had steady hands. It was the thing that had made her good at clinical work before anything else. The ability to be frightened and functional at the same time. The refusal to let one cancel out the other. Compromised. Her sleep. 3 hours in the Langham bed, not consecutive, with the specific shallow quality of sleep that knows it is temporary and does not commit. Her eyes showed it. She put on the minimum amount of makeup that would make them show something else. Monitoring. The thing in her chest. Not fear. She had identified that precisely. And it was not fear. It was something more like altitude sickness. The particular disorientation of having climbed to a place where the air pressure was different and the rules of the lower elevations no longer applied cleanly. She had agreed to walk into a room full of people who had watched her humiliated and then watched her defended, and she was going to do it alone, wearing the same dress, and she was going to wait for a man who had stopped being strategic to come to her. She took a breath. She picked up the small earpiece Lucien's associate had brought to the room at 5 o'clock, along with a briefing that had lasted 20 minutes and covered the layout of the Alcott Club, the positions of Lucien's people, the 3 exits, the protocol if things moved faster than expected. The associate, the same woman from the parking stairwell, still no name offered, had looked at her during the briefing with the assessment of someone trying to calculate a variable they hadn't been given good data on. "Have you done anything like this before?" she'd asked. "I've delivered terminal diagnoses to parents while their children were in the next room," Vivian said. "Different kind of room, same principle." The woman had nodded slowly. "Keep moving if he tries to isolate you. Don't let him back you into a corner, literally or conversationally. And if you hear Lucien's voice in the earpiece say the word clear, you move immediately toward the nearest exit regardless of what's happening." "Understood." "He will not let anything happen to you." "I know," Vivian said. And she did know. That was the specific thing she was monitoring. Not whether she trusted him, because she did, and the speed at which that had become true was its own separate subject she was not examining tonight, but whether that trust was changing the calculation in ways that would make her careless. Whether she was walking into this room partly because it was tactically sound, and partly because he had said, "I would not survive it," and some part of her had decided that was a reason to be brave. Both could be true, she had decided. Both were true. She was going to do it anyway. The Alcott Club was on East Walker, a private members venue with the specific aesthetic of old Chicago money. Dark wood paneling, deep leather, the smell of cigars that were no longer permitted inside, but had spent 40 years soaking into the walls and were not leaving. The fundraiser was for a children's literacy nonprofit, which had a particular irony that Vivian noted and set aside. She arrived at 7:10, 10 minutes after the event's start time, early enough to establish her presence before the room reached full capacity, late enough that the initial clusters of arrival conversation had already formed, and she could move through them without her entrance being a spectacle. It was a spectacle anyway. She understood, crossing the threshold into the main room with its high ceilings and warm light, that it was always going to be a spectacle, that the calculus of the room had changed on the night of the Meridian Gala and had not changed back, that she had become something these rooms track now. Not celebrity, not power, but the specific thing that rooms like this found most compelling, which was a story that was still unfinished. People looked. She let them look. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. She was not going to drink tonight, was not going to compromise anything. And she moved through the room with the measured pace of someone who had somewhere specific to be and was not hurrying to get there. She did not look for Lucien. She knew he was not visibly present. His people were here, positioned, but Lucien himself was outside the building in a vehicle she had been told the location of, monitoring through audio and a contact with a visual on the room's main entrance. Close enough to be inside in 3 minutes if needed. 3 minutes was a long time, she knew that. She also knew that she could hold a room for 3 minutes. She had held worse. She saw Adrian at 8:17. He was standing near the bar at the far end of the room. Not drinking, she noticed, which meant he was operating deliberately, which meant he was already in the mode she had been warned about. He was wearing a charcoal suit instead of a tuxedo, less formal, which was itself a signal. He had dressed for mobility, for action, for a different kind of evening than the one the invitation had described. He was with 2 men she didn't recognize, both with the build of people whose primary professional contribution was physical. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. She watched the sequence move across his face in approximately 1 second. Recognition, shock, recalculation. The gray that had been there at the Meridian was different tonight. Less shock, more something focused and cold. The specific quality of a man who has revised his plan in real time and decided the revision is better than the original. He excused himself from the 2 men. He walked toward her. She held her ground. He stopped 2 feet away and looked at her with the expression she remembered from the worst years of the marriage. The one he'd worn when she had done something that surprised him, when she had moved outside the shape he'd built for her, and he was deciding what that meant. "You came," he said. "I was invited." "You know what I mean." "I usually do," she said. "That was always the problem." His jaw moved slightly. "Where is he?" "I don't know what you mean." "DeLuca." He said the name with a flatness that was performing contempt, and underneath the performance was something rawer. "Where is he?" "He's not in this room." "I came alone." "You didn't come alone." "Adrian?" She kept her voice at exactly the register she would have used with a difficult patient's family member. Not soft, not hostile, precise and contained. "What do you want?" "I want—" He stopped, looked at the dress. Something moved behind his eyes, something she couldn't name but could feel from 2 feet away. A heat that was not desire and not anger, but the specific compound of both that had always been the most dangerous thing in him. "I want you to understand what you've done." "What I've done." "You've gone to war," he said, low and compressed, the voice of a man managing volume while losing everything else. "With me. With a divorce attorney and he almost spat it, "a criminal. You've aligned yourself with someone who has people killed, Vivian. I've rebuilt my life," she said, "after you spent 14 months trying to prevent me from doing that. I was protecting, you were punishing." She said it without heat. That was what landed it. Not rage, not trembling, just the flat, clean accuracy of a diagnosis. "You were punishing me for leaving, and when the gala happened, you started punishing me for being defended. You've filed fabricated legal motions and planted someone in my hospital and sent men with fake court orders to a parking garage." She watched his face go rigid. "I know all of it, Adrian. My attorney knows all of it. And someone else knows all of it who has more resources than you do and is considerably less patient." The room had contracted around them without moving. Nobody was overtly watching, but the conversations nearest to them had developed the slightly hollow quality of people who are listening in a different direction than they're talking. "You're threatening me," he said. "I'm describing the situation." In front of... He glanced at the room, and she saw the calculation happening, the same calculation he always made, the social arithmetic of consequence, who was watching and what it would cost. "You think this is over. You think because DeLuca has... Adrian." Her voice dropped slightly. "The federal investigators already had an open file on you. The fraud case, Municipal contracts, 18 months of work. You didn't know that. She watched his face. She watched him know that she was telling the truth. They didn't have what they needed, she said. They do now. For 3 full seconds, nothing moved in his face. Then something broke. Not dramatically, not the way faces break in films, but in the small, precise way of a man whose central structural assumption has just been removed. The specific collapse of someone realizing that the floor they were standing on had not been where they thought. He started. He stopped. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before in 12 years of marriage. Not fury, not contempt, not the performed sympathy that was worse than either. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he fundamentally cannot understand, a thing that has operated entirely outside his categories and has produced a result he has no framework for. Why? He said. And it was not rhetorical. It was genuine. It was perhaps the most genuine thing he had said to her in 12 years. Why are you doing this? You have what you wanted. You're free. You're clear. You have your life back. Why? Because you put someone in my ward, she said. He blinked. The children, she said, not me. Not my schedule or my reputation or the assets from my mother's estate. You put someone in my ward, with my patients, with a 7-year-old boy who has been in that hospital for a month and whose mother has not gone home and who draws in bed because it is the only thing he can control. She was not raising her voice. She would not raise her voice. That's why. That's where you cross the line that doesn't have a negotiation on the other side of it. Adrian Holloway stood in the Alcott Club in his mobility suit with his 2 men 10 feet behind him and his federal file and his mercenary contractors and his 14 months of systematic campaign, and he looked at her and he had nothing. It lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then his face closed. Get the car, he said, not to her, to someone, through a phone pulled from his jacket, and Vivian heard the tone shift and understood in her body before her mind confirmed it that the conversation had ended and the next phase had begun, that he had moved from the attempt to control her with words to something older and more desperate. Lucienne, she said very quietly toward the earpiece. I heard everything, his voice came back. Stay still. Don't move toward the exit. My people are moving. Adrian had taken 1 step toward her. One of his men was moving from the bar. The room, which had been performing unawareness, was no longer performing it. Conversations had stopped. People had turned. The specific social electricity of a situation departing from all known scripts had conducted itself through the room in under 2 seconds. Adrian, she said, loud enough for the room. Exactly as loud as necessary, no louder. Don't. He stopped. Not because she'd told him to. That had never worked. He stopped because of the room, because the calculation came back online for a half second, because 43 people were watching him and he was still, in some basement chamber of himself, a man who cared about what rooms thought of him. You have nothing, he said. It was the voice of someone trying to believe something they no longer believed. Check your phone, she said. He looked at her. Check it, she said. He looked down at his phone. She watched him read whatever had come through. She didn't know the specifics. She had not been given the specifics. But Lucien had told her there would be a moment and there would be something on his phone, and when he read it, she would know. She knew. The color left his face in a way that was different from the Meridian Gala, different from every prior shade she had catalogued, because this was not embarrassment and not shock and not calculation failing. This was the specific gray of a man seeing the end of something, the total end, the kind of end you can't maneuver around or delay or reframe. That's a summary, she said. Your attorney has the full documentation. So does the federal prosecutor's office. So does Patricia Howe. A beat. And Adrian, he looked up. The motion about psychological instability, she said. I want you to think about what it means that you filed that motion, that you spent resources and time constructing that specific fiction, about what it tells you about how you see women who leave you. She held his eyes. Think about it while you have time to think. The main doors of the Alcott Club opened, not dramatically, not loudly. They opened with the ordinary mechanical movement of a door being pushed from the outside. And 3 people came through them who were not guests and were not staff, and who moved with the specific directed quality of people who know exactly where they are going and what they will do when they get there. Federal badges, Two additional people entered from a side door that Vivian had noted on the building's layout during her briefing. She had been told there were 3 exits, which meant 3 entrances, which meant 3 points of closure. One of Adrian's men took 2 steps toward her. He stopped because a hand landed on his shoulder from behind. One of Lucien's people, positioned so smoothly that she had not seen the positioning happen, which meant it had been happening for the last 20 minutes while she was holding a conversation, and they were building the walls of the room around Adrian's people without anyone noticing the walls going up. Sir? One of the federal agents, a woman in her 40s with the particular professional composure of someone who had done this in rooms like this before and understood that the manner of an arrest mattered as much as the fact of it. She was speaking to Adrian. Adrian Holloway, I'm Special Agent Torres, FBI. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges including wire fraud, conspiracy, attempted witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. She produced the warrant with the same economy of motion. I'd ask you to come with me quietly, given the location. The room was silent. Completely, utterly, architecturally silent. The silence of 43 people understanding simultaneously that they were witnesses to something that would be described to other people for the rest of their lives. Adrian Holloway looked at the warrant. He looked at Vivian. She held his gaze. She did not look away, did not soften, did not give him anything on her face that he could interpret as mercy or regret or the complicated remains of 12 years. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at the hardest things in her work, directly, steadily, without flinching. Not because it didn't hurt, but because flinching helped no one and changed nothing, and the thing in front of you was still there regardless. This is, he started. Sir, Torres again. Gentle. Firm. Please. He looked around the room, at the faces, at the people who had applauded him and invested with him and attended his events and whose social credit had been, for 15 years, adjacent to his social credit and was now separating from it in real time, visibly, the way you watch two things that were joined come apart, not explosive, not dramatic, just the clean, irrevocable fact of separation. Vivian. His voice had lost every quality she recognized. It was stripped down to something she had not heard from him before, something that might have been, in different circumstances, in a man with different architecture, the beginning of understanding. I want you to know, Adrian, she said. He stopped. Don't, she said. Not cruel, not triumphant, just no. Just, this is not the moment, and I am not the person, and whatever it is you think you want to say has 14 months of parking garages and nursing board complaints and fabricated motions and children's hospital files in front of it. And there is no sentence that crosses that cleanly. Agent Torres touched his arm. He went. He did not fight it. That was the thing she had not predicted. The specific way he didn't fight it. The quality of his compliance, which was not dignity and not defeat, but something more like the end of a performance. The moment when an actor leaves the stage because the stage lights have gone down, and the performance is simply over and there is nothing left for the performance to be performed to. His 2 men were separated and handled with the efficient quietness of a choreography that had clearly been rehearsed. The room breathed. It breathed collectively. The whole room, the specific sound of 43 people releasing something they had been holding, and then, in the slightly disorganized way of real events as opposed to scripted ones, conversation began to return, fragmented at first, sentences exchanged quietly, and then louder. And then the room was its room again, except that everything in it had shifted 2 degrees in a direction that could not be shifted back. Vivian set down her water glass. Her hand was steady. She was aware that it was steady. And she was aware that steadiness, right now, in this room, in this aftermath, was a choice she was making, that she could make the other choice, that something in her chest was pressing against the steadiness with the specific force of everything she had held compressed through the last hour and the last 2 months and the last 14 months and the 12 years before that. And she was choosing, actively, moment by moment, to keep the steadiness in place until she was somewhere that the choice didn't have to be made by will. Her earpiece. Coming in, Lucian said. She turned toward the main doors. He came through them 40 seconds later, and the room did the thing it had done at the Meridian. The slight reconfiguration of attention, the orientation toward him, except that this time it was quieter, less theatrical. The room had already spent its drama, had already witnessed its main event, and what was left was the aftermath, the smaller adjustments. He crossed the room toward her. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face with the specific quality of assessment that she recognized, but that tonight had something beneath it that was neither strategic nor managed. Something that showed, that was not trying to not show, that had run out of the energy for concealment. "You're all right," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He looked at her for another moment. Then, very quietly, very simply, without the old-world formality of the meridian, and without performance, and without an audience he was speaking to, "I should have done this differently. I should have—" "Lucienne!" She stopped him the same way she'd stopped Adrian, but the tone was entirely different. Not a wall, a hand. "Not tonight." He held her gaze. "Not tonight," she said again. "Tonight I just want to—" She stopped, because what she wanted to say was complicated, and the room was not empty, and she was still wearing the earpiece, and the federal agents were still completing their documentation 20 feet away. "Go home," he said softly. "Yes." "I'll drive you." She looked at him, at the silver in his hair and the lines of his face, and the particular way he was standing, which was with less of the managed uprightness she'd observed at the Meridian, less architecture, more simply a man standing in a room at the end of a long night with the weight of it visible on him. "Okay," she said. They were almost at the door when she heard it, behind them, a sound that was wrong, that had the specific wrongness of something that was not part of the choreography, not part of the plan, not part of any of the 3 exits or the federal agents or Lucian's people still in the room completing their work. One of the men, not Adrian's 2, those had been contained, but a third, someone she had not been briefed on, someone who had been in the room the whole time as a guest, as a legitimate invitee, and who had watched everything that had happened and had made a decision in the last 60 seconds that the evening's events had put him in a position he could not afford to be in. She heard Lucienne say something sharp and low. She heard movement behind her. She turned. The man had a phone, not a weapon, but the specific way he was holding it, screened toward Lucienne, had the quality of a threat that was not physical, the threat of something captured, something recorded, something that could be— Lucian had gone completely still. "You know what this is," the man said. He was 50, prosperous, the face of someone who had always had enough leverage to feel safe. "You know what I have on this phone, and you know who I'll send it to if you—" "Keating," Lucienne said. One word, flat and specific, the word of a man identifying something he has already cataloged. The man, Keating, held the phone up, and Vivian, standing 2 feet to Lucien's left, understood in the specific way she understood things that moved fast. This was not about tonight. This was older than tonight. This was something between these 2 men that predated everything, that had nothing to do with Adrian Holloway or emerald dresses or parking garages. And it had been sitting in this room all evening waiting for exactly this moment, for the moment when Lucienne was visible and present and could be reached. Lucienne looked at her. One look. Fast, complete. The look of a man communicating something he cannot say out loud. She looked back at him. And in the held second before everything moved again, she understood that the thing on Keating's phone, whatever it was, whatever it could do, was capable of undoing everything they had just built, everything that the federal case rested on, everything that— "Mr. Keating," she said. Both men looked at her. She stepped forward. She stepped forward and she did it the way she did everything that mattered, without announcing it, without performing it, with the specific economy of someone who has learned that the gap between decision and action is where things go wrong. "Mr. Keating," she said again, and her voice had the register she used in the worst moments of the ward. The voice that was not loud and not soft, but simply present. The voice that cut through the noise of a crisis room, not by volume, but by clarity. "I'm Vivienne Cross. I'm a pediatric nurse at St. Oran Hospital. I don't know what you have on that phone, and I don't know what you think it's worth. But I know that there are 3 federal agents 20 feet behind you who have been watching this interaction for the last 45 seconds. I must—" Keating's eyes moved to her. He had not expected her to speak. That was the thing about men like him. They planned for the known variables, and she was not a variable he had planned for. "Whatever leverage you think you have," she said, "you are currently demonstrating it in front of federal witnesses who will be asked to describe this moment in a courtroom. So I'd suggest that what happens in the next 10 seconds matters considerably more than whatever is on that phone. Keating looked at her. He looked at Lucian. He looked at the room, at Agent Torres, who had turned from the documentation with the specific unhurried attention of someone who has identified a new item of interest and is deciding what category it belongs to. The phone lowered. Not all the way. Not with surrender. With the specific recalibration of a man who has revised his arithmetic and found the numbers no longer support the action. "This isn't finished," he said. To Lucian, not to her. He had already, in the way of men like him, removed her from the calculation now that she had served her function. "No," Lucian said, "it isn't." The flatness of it was not a threat. It was simply an acknowledgement of fact, the way you acknowledge weather. It is what it is, and it will be what it will be, and there is no drama in stating it. Keating walked toward the side exit. Agent Torres let him go, which meant he was either being allowed to move or was being followed by someone Vivian couldn't see. And from the slight quality of attention Torres maintained on the room, she suspected the latter. The main doors closed behind the last of the federal team at 9:43. The room was empty except for Vivian and Lucien and two of his people finishing a quiet conversation near the bar and the staff beginning the mechanical work of clearing the event. Lucien turned to her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the hotel room doorway, with the thing that didn't have armor over it anymore, that had been running without armor for the last hour, that she suspected would need to be addressed now, or become one of those things that calcified in the space between two people and stayed there. "Keating," she said. "Yes." "Who is he?" A pause. The pause of a man deciding how much truth the moment requires. She watched him decide that it required all of it. "He was my father's accountant," Lucien said, "for 20 years. He managed the books for the original operations, everything from 1987 through 2004. He has documentation of transactions that were never going to be relevant to anything current because the statute of limitations ran out 15 years ago." He looked at the side exit where Keating had gone, but they're relevant to the federal case against Adrian because 3 of those early transactions involved a municipal official who is currently a federal judge, the judge who is assigned to Adrian's case. She looked at him. "If Keating sends that documentation to the right people," he said, "Adrian's case gets reassigned, the timeline resets, and his legal team gets 6 months to work with the disruption." Why does Keating care about Adrian's case? He doesn't. He cares about me being publicly visible in a federal investigation context. The last thing Keating wants is my name in federal proceedings of any kind, even as a cooperating witness, even on the right side of the case. It opens questions about what I know and who I know it about. About him. Among others. She processed that. "So he'll send it anyway," she said. "At some point, when you're not in the room to see him do it." "Probably. Then what was tonight about, confronting you here?" "Negotiation," Lucian said. "He wanted me to know he had it. He wanted to open the conversation from a position of leverage." He paused. "You interrupted the opening." "I noticed. It was—" He stopped, and something crossed his face that was not quite amusement and not quite something else, something that was both and that she was beginning to recognize as the expression he made when the situation had moved beyond his projections in a direction he hadn't anticipated and found himself, against all prior preference, grateful for the surprise. "It was well done." "It bought time," she said. "Not much." "Enough." He met her eyes. "I know how to handle Keating. I've known about the documentation for 11 years. I have my own documentation, not leverage, not threat material, but the kind of thing that makes a negotiation more equal. We'll reach an arrangement." "A legal arrangement." "A legal arrangement," he confirmed, with the specific weight of someone who is making a commitment and knows it. She looked at him for a long moment in the emptying room. "All right," she said. He drove her home. Not to the Langham. To Lincoln Square, to the one-bedroom apartment with the 6-year-old wool wrap and the emerald dress's original hanger still in the closet and the kitchen counter where she ate pasta when things were difficult. He parked on the street. He didn't move to get out. She didn't move to get out either, and the car was quiet, and the street outside was the specific quiet of Lincoln Square at 10:30 on a cold November night. A few lights and windows, a dog somewhere, the ambient sound of a city that was mostly asleep. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it honestly." "Yes. The criminal operations, the dismantling." She turned to look at him. "Is that real? Is that already happening, or is it something you're telling me is possible?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's been happening for 3 years," he said. "Before the gala, before I knew you existed." He looked at the windshield, at the street beyond it. "I told you I made it my business to know things. The thing I've known longest, longer than anything else, is that what my father built was not what I would have chosen to build. I inherited it. I maintained it because the alternative at 28 was chaos that would have hurt more people than the maintenance did." He paused. "That's not an excuse. It's context." "I know the difference," she said. "The transition is 3 years from completion. Legitimate international trade, 3 real estate development companies, a logistics firm. All of it auditable, all of it clean." He turned to look at her. "The people who work for me, the ones who've been with me for 20 years, they'll have employment in the legitimate operations if they want it. The ones who don't," he paused, "there are arrangements. There are ways to close things down that don't leave people without options." She thought about that. 3 years, she said, give or take. "And the federal investigators, cooperating with them, that's part of the transition. It complicates it," he said, with the honesty of someone who is not going to make the picture simpler than it is. "It creates risk. People I've worked with for a long time will face consequences. Some of them are my responsibility, and I'm trying to minimize that. Some of them chose what they chose, and that's, He stopped. "It's not clean. There's no version of this that's clean." "No," she agreed, "but it's what I have. It's what I can offer." He looked at her with the full quality of his attention, which was, she had learned, a substantial thing. "I know that may not be enough." She looked at him. She thought about 12 years of a marriage that had looked right from the outside and been wrong all the way through. She thought about 14 months of rebuilding, of the specific architecture of a life reconstructed from its own materials, every beam and wall chosen deliberately because nothing was left from the original structure that she trusted. She thought about what it meant to trust someone, not blindly, not based on performance or on the hand-kiss formality of a ballroom gesture, but based on the accumulated evidence of how a person behaved when the situation cost them something. She thought about, "I would not survive it," said in the dark, unmanaged, unretracted. "Come inside," she said. He looked at her. "I'm going to make tea," she said, "because it's cold and it's late and I have things to say that need to be said somewhere that isn't a car. And then we're going to talk about what 3 years looks like from the inside." A beat. "And about what comes after." He got out of the car. The tea was Earl Grey because it was the only kind she had, and she hadn't thought to check before offering it, and he drank it without comment at her kitchen counter while she stood across from him, and the apartment was what it was, small, lived in, the particular arrangement of a life that had chosen function over display. He looked at home in it, which surprised her. She would have predicted that a man of his specific history and resources would have the quality of something that didn't fit in small spaces. He didn't. He stood at her counter and drank the tea and looked at the window and seemed, for the first time in all the context she'd seen him, simply at rest. "The gala," she said. "Which one?" "The Meridian. The first one." She wrapped her hands around her own mug. "Why did you really do it?" "Not the explanation about the emergency room. I believe that. I'm not questioning that. But the specific choice. The hand. The words. In front of that room." He looked at his tea. "Because I've spent 30 years watching people in rooms like that make the calculation," he said. "The one where someone is being hurt, and you decide whether the cost of intervening is worth it. And the calculation almost always comes out the same way. The cost is too high, the connection is too slight. It's not your business. There are reasons not to." He looked up. "I've made that calculation myself, many times, not always correctly." A pause. "That night I was tired of the calculation. I was tired of standing in rooms watching it happen and being, by virtue of what I am, what I've built, part of the reason the calculation comes out that way. Part of why people don't intervene, because intervening in the presence of someone like me has consequences they're not willing to pay." She looked at him. "So I intervened," he said. And I chose to use the thing that I am instead of in spite of it. She was quiet for a moment. You could have just said something to him directly, she said. You didn't have to make it about me. No, he said. I couldn't have. If I had spoken to Adrian directly, it would have been a dominance display. It would have been one powerful man telling another to back down, and you would have been, he paused, choosing the word, the object of it, the thing being protected, instead of the person being honored. She thought about that. She thought about the specific difference between being protected and being honored, which she had felt in the moment without having language for it, which was part of why she had stood still when every instinct said run, which was part of why the memory of it had not faded the way she'd expected it to in the weeks following. You thought about it, she said. In the moment. You made that distinction in the moment. I've had 30 years to think about the difference between power and respect, he said. It was not a difficult distinction to make. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set down her mug. I'm going to need you to be patient, she said. With me, with what this is and what pace it moves at. I spent 12 years with someone who moved at his pace, and I've been learning to move at mine, and I don't want to lose that, whatever this is. I know. I'm not asking for promises about 3 years from now. I'm not asking for guarantees. She met his eyes. I'm asking for honesty when things are complicated, and for the kind of patience that doesn't keep a ledger. He looked at her with the stillness that had no performance left in it. I can do that, he said. Good. She picked up her mug. He picked up his. They stood in the kitchen and drank their tea, and outside the city made its city sounds. And inside the apartment was warm in the way that small spaces are warm when there are two people in them who have decided, without drama, to stay. The weeks that followed were not quiet. Quiet was not a thing that arrived all at once. Adrian Holloway was arraigned on 6 counts 12 days after his arrest at the Alcott Club. His bail was set at a number that required liquidating assets, which began a cascade. The leveraged real estate holdings, the development partnerships, the carefully constructed empire that had looked solid from the outside and had been running on a combination of legitimate revenue and municipal corruption for longer than his attorneys wanted to discuss. Vivienne did not follow the proceedings closely. Patricia Howe followed them for who engaged her, sent weekly summaries in plain language called when something required her attention or a signature or a decision. The Indiana property was released within the first 10 days. The frozen accounts unfroze. The divorce settlement was finalized on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that Vivienne left 17 minutes after arriving, having signed 3 documents and exchanged no words with Adrian, who was present via his attorney and was not, Patricia had ensured, in the building at the same time. She drove to St. Aurin. She walked to the 4th floor. She went to room 412. Marcus Webb was sitting up in bed with a drawing pad, and the morning blood work had come back with numbers that his oncologist had described as meaningfully positive, which was not a guarantee and not a cure, but was the specific language of medicine for something real happening in the right direction. You're early today, he said. I am early today, she agreed. How come? Good morning. He looked at her with the enormous dark eyes that had, in the last 3 weeks, acquired a quality she recognized. Not just the child she'd sat with in the dark at midnight, but someone who had been through something and knew it and was deciding day by day what to do with the knowing. Are you okay? He asked. She pulled the chair to the side of his bed and sat down, which she did not always do, which she did only when there was time and when the time was warranted. Yes, she said, I am. Something happened. Several things happened. Good things or bad things? She considered him. Both, she said. Mostly good things, but the kind that came out of bad ones. You know how... She stopped, reconsidered, because he was 7, and some metaphors were not for 7-year-olds, and then reconsidered again because Marcus Webb was 7 and had spent 6 weeks in a hospital, and his mother slept in a chair and he had earned whatever honesty she could offer. You know how sometimes a thing hurts a lot while it's happening and then it's over and you're in a different place than you were before? He nodded with the gravity of someone for whom this was not a hypothetical. That, she said. He went back to his drawing. She sat with him for 20 minutes before the shift's demands reclaimed her. And in those 20 minutes, the ward was its ordinary, extraordinary self. monitors beeping at intervals, the squeak of shoe soles on linoleum, someone's television at low volume, a parent's voice from 2 rooms down in the tone of someone telling a child that the needle would only hurt for a second. She stood and put the chair back and looked at what Marcus had been drawing. A building, tall and detailed, the kind of thing he'd been drawing all week, architectural in its precision for a 7-year-old. "What is it?" she asked. He turned it toward her. It was a hospital. Not St. Oran, not any hospital she recognized. His hospital, the one in his head, with the details he thought a hospital should have. Taller windows, a garden on the roof, a better arrangement of the entrances. "For later," he said, "when I'm an architect." She looked at the drawing for a moment longer than she needed to. "It's good," she said. "The garden especially." He nodded, accepting this, already turning to the next thing. She went back to work. Fussy. The Keating situation resolved in the way Lucien had said it would. Not cleanly, not without cost, but through the specific kind of negotiation that left both parties with less than they wanted and more than they'd feared. The documentation went to a secure third party. The judge recused himself from Adrian's case on a technicality that had nothing to do with the documentation publicly, and the case was reassigned to a federal judge in the Northern District who had no prior associations with anyone in the relevant network. Adrian pled guilty in February to 4 of the 6 counts. The sentence was announced on a gray Thursday morning that Vivian spent on shift, learning about it via a text from Patricia Howe that said only, "Done. 7 years, eligible for parole in 4. Call me when you have a minute." She didn't call until her break. When she did, Patricia said, "How do you feel?" Vivian thought about it, standing in the break room with a bad cup of coffee from the machine that everyone complained about and nobody fixed. "Like it's over," she said. "That's exactly what it is," Patricia said. "Is that enough to feel?" "Vivian," Patricia said, with the affection of someone who has spent 18 months in the trenches with a person and has formed opinions. "It's plenty." Spring came to Chicago the way it always did. Not gradually, not gracefully, but in the specific aggressive way of a city that had been holding its cold for 5 months and released it all at once. The temperature jumping 15 degrees in a week. The lake doing something complicated with the light that made the whole east side of the city look like it had been washed and hung to dry. The DeLuca lakeside property was not what she had imagined. She had imagined, from the context of his life, something imposing. High walls, security, the architecture of a place that had learned to defend itself. What she found was older than that and quieter than that. A house that had been built in the 1940s and added onto in pieces without plan. The way houses were added onto when families changed shape over decades, with the particular warmth of a building that had been lived in seriously. She had been here 4 times by May. The first time had been practical. A meeting with Lucien and 2 of his attorneys about the final pieces of the federal cooperation agreement, her presence tangential but requested. The second time had been dinner, simple, at the table in the kitchen that looked out over the lake. The third time she had brought Marcus Webb's most recent blood work results because she had been excited about them and he had been the person she wanted to tell. And she had registered that fact about herself without examining it too closely and had simply driven to the lake. The fourth time she brought the emerald dress, not to wear. She brought it because she had decided, sometime in March, that she was going to stop keeping it at the apartment as though it were a talisman or a wound, as though the dress were the story rather than just a thing she'd worn on a night that had turned out to be important. She brought it because she was going to wear it again at the Pediatric Foundation fundraiser that was being held at the lakeside property in 2 weeks, and she needed to know it would fit the same, that the months had not changed it. It fit the same. She stood in the bedroom Lucien had shown her to, in front of the mirror there, and looked at herself in the emerald dress for the second time in 6 months. And what she saw was not the same thing she'd seen in the mirror at the shop on Division Street. The older Vietnamese woman had said, "You look like someone who survived something." And that had been true then, potential truth, the truth of a thing that had not yet become itself. It was a different kind of true now. She went downstairs. Lucien was in the kitchen, which is where he usually was in the evenings, not cooking with any great skill. He had admitted this with the directness that she had come to regard as one of his primary qualities, but with enough functional competence to produce things that were edible and occasionally better than that. He was doing something with a pan and something that smelled like garlic, and she came through the doorway and he turned and stopped. He looked at her, the way he had looked at her in the back of the SUV in the hospital parking structure, with the full quality of his attention, and beneath it, the thing that was not managed, that had not been managed since November, that she had stopped expecting him to manage. "The fundraiser's 2 weeks," she said. "I know. I wanted to check the fit." "It fits," he said. "I can see that," she agreed. He turned back to the pan. She came to stand beside him at the counter, not helping, just standing in the specific way of two people who have negotiated the geometry of a shared space over time and found it comfortable. "The Foundation Board approved the pediatric ward expansion," she said. "I heard." "You heard from the board, or you heard from me when I called you?" "The board sent a summary. Then you called." A pause. The call was better. She watched him adjust the heat under the pan. "The anonymous funding," she said. "I know it's you. I know you know." "The board doesn't need to know." "No. But I need you to know that I know," she said, "because I have a rule about keeping things in the dark that I've earned the right to have, and I'm not willing to compromise it. So I know. We both know, and it stays there." He looked at her sideways. "Agreed," he said. She reached past him for the wooden spoon that was sitting unused on the counter. "You're going to burn it," she said. "I know what I'm doing." "You're going to burn it," she said again, and took over the pan with the efficiency of someone who has spent years in institutional kitchens and has opinions about heat management, and he stepped back and let her, with the quality of a man who has learned that some things are better yielded than defended, and that knowing the difference is not weakness. They ate at the kitchen table with the lake visible through the window, going the particular late April color of water that has decided it is ready to be warm. Not warm yet, but deciding. They ate and talked about the foundation and about Marcus Webb, who had been discharged 2 weeks earlier with a treatment plan and a follow-up schedule, and a drawing of a hospital with a rooftop garden that was currently framed on the wall of his parents' living room. They talked about Patricia Howe, who had already referred 3 new clients on the basis of how Adrian's case had resolved, and who had sent Vivian a bottle of something expensive with a card that said "only well done" in Patricia's compressed handwriting. They talked about the thing Lucien was doing with 3 of his legitimate companies that was complicated and interesting and about which he had genuine enthusiasm, the specific enthusiasm of a man who was finding, in his mid-50s, that he had capacities he had not previously given much room. They talked about the things that needed to be talked about, and they did not talk about the things that could be left for later, and the line between those two categories had become something they navigated without needing to discuss the navigation. After dinner, they sat on the back porch in the cold that was less cold than it had been, with the lake in front of them and the city lights to the north curving along the waterline. And she thought about the shape of the last 6 months laid out against itself. The parking garage, the hotel room, the Alcott Club, the cup of tea in the kitchen in Lincoln Square. And she could see the shape of it now, the specific shape of something that had been built under pressure and was still standing, which was its own category of proof. "The fundraiser," she said. "What about it?" "The emerald dress?" "Yes." "You said it at the Meridian, and you said it at the hotel. Why the emerald dress specifically?" He was quiet for a moment, not the managed silence, not the strategic pause, the silence of someone actually thinking about a question. "Because Adrian told you it was cheap," he said. "And I wanted to see you wear it somewhere that was yours. Not defending it, not explaining it, just wearing it because it's yours and it's green and it's the dress you chose." He looked at the lake. "That's the whole reason." She looked at his profile in the lake light. She thought about what it meant that this was the whole reason, that it was not symbolic beyond what it was, not a statement about their story or about his regard or about any of the large things that could have been layered onto it. That it was simply, "You chose this, and you were mocked for choosing it, and I want to see you wear it somewhere the choice is honored." That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. She reached over and put her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair, not with urgency, not with the weight of declaration, just the simple placement of a hand that has decided where it wants to be. He turned his hand over under hers. They sat with the lake in front of them and the city at their backs, and the spring coming through the cold in the specific way that spring came here, insisting, and she thought, this is what after looks like. Not triumph, not resolution in the cinematic sense, Not the clean ending of a thing that was always going to end this way. Just the ordinary, extraordinary fact of two people sitting on a porch at the end of a hard season, with the work still ahead and the worst behind, and the evening settling around them like something finally coming to rest. She did not need it to be more than what it was. What it was enough. 2 weeks later, she walked into the fundraiser at the lakeside property in the emerald dress, and the room did not stop for her entry, and nobody kissed her hand, and there was no theater and no declaration and no audience arranged for the purpose of witnessing something. She walked in, and people she knew greeted her, and she greeted them back, and a colleague from the foundation board brought her the drink she'd asked for, and a child from the pediatric ward, 8 years old, 3 months out from a difficult treatment, in remission, ran across the room and wrapped both arms around her waist with the particular force of a child who has no inhibitions about the expression of feeling. She held on. She held on with both arms, in the emerald dress, in the room full of people who had gathered to do the work of caring for children who needed care, and she held on for as long as the child held on, which was a long time. When she finally let go and looked up, Lucien was across the room. He was not watching her with the focused intentionality of the Meridian Ballroom. He was in conversation with two of the Foundation's medical advisors, listening with the genuine attention he brought to things that mattered to him. And he looked up at approximately the same moment she looked at him, the way that happens when two people have learned to exist in the same space. He didn't cross the room. She didn't cross the room. They looked at each other across the distance of a party full of people doing something good, and something passed between them that did not need to be named or performed or witnessed to be real. Then the medical advisor said something, and he returned his attention there, and she felt the child at her side tugging at the fabric of the dress to show her something. A photograph, a drawing, something important to an 8-year-old, and she bent down to look at it. The emerald dress was the color of something alive. It had always been. She wore it that way.